On today's episode, we get prepared for what could be one of the most important games in NHL regular season history. The Dallas Stars head to Washington, D.C. for a date with the Red Hot Capitals and their captain, Alexander Ovechkin, who is on the verge of becoming the NHL's second all-time goal scorer. 2 goals tonight would put him in that position over Gordie Howe, leaving only Wayne Gretzky left to be caught up to. And on today's show, we'll get you prepared for everything you need to know about this game, from Ovechkin to the rest of the team to what the Stars need to do in order to leave our nation's capital with 2 points. All of this and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Stars.
You're Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, your local expert on all things Dallas Stars hockey, coming to you on this Thursday, December 15th. And today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline.net is where the game starts. And whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener, thank you for stopping by and making Locked On Stars your first listen of the day. If you're watching on YouTube and you haven't subscribed already, please do consider hitting the subscribe button. And if you're listening on audio only, you can follow us on there as well. You can also rate and review the show if you enjoy it and want to help us out and help us reach a new audience. So do that if you do feel so inclined. Truly do appreciate the continued support throughout this season. And the Dallas Stars are now in the middle of their 5-game Metropolitan Division East Coast road trip. They head to America's capital in Washington, D.C. for a date with the scorching hot Washington Capitals and Alexander Ovechkin. And this team, Washington, they're in a much different place than they were the last time these two teams met together. This will be the second and final meeting between these teams this season. They met earlier in the year back on October 27th. The Dallas Stars, of course, winning that game at the American Airlines Center by a score of 2-0. Jake Ottinger gets his first shutout of the season, and a big game overall for the Stars, despite what the score might say. Many will remember that game. Yoel Kiviranta gets that incredible goal off of a really hard forecheck, playing nice defensively and stealing the puck and then beating Darcy Kemper one-on-one to put the Stars up 2-0 in that game. But like I said, Washington doing a little bit better now than they were at that point in the season. They've been ridden with several different injuries this season. Yet if you look very closely at this team and look closely at this Metro Division, you can see that this Washington team is still very much alive in the playoff race and still in a really nice spot at this point in the season. The 6th place mark that is on their name right now is very deceiving. They're 15-12-4, good for 34 points this season. And if you look at the teams above them in the Metro Division, they're really not too far behind. Carolina and Pittsburgh are tied for second place in that division at 38 points, and the New York teams, currently slotted in at 4th and 5th, are both tied with 35 points. So they're really not too far off the Capitals from being near a top 3 spot in this division. I mean, like the Atlantic, the Metro is also just an absolute gauntlet this season. 6 really solid teams. And then, of course, the Flyers and Blue Jackets not quite up to the same level as some of the other teams in the division, but still, I mean, can be a tough outing for any team any given night. And the Capitals are starting to finally find their groove and hit their stride this season, as they are winners of 5 consecutive games, including a big win on Tuesday night. They played a little bit after the Dallas Stars. And of course, the biggest story surrounding this team right now is the elite play of their 37-year-old captain, Alexander Ovechkin, who has 20 goals this season, 14 assists, good for 34 points, in total. That is the best on the team, again, at 37 years old, continuing to play at an incredibly high level, despite being one of the older players in the NHL. Just seems to be a trend as of right now with guys like Ovechkin, Sidney Crosby, who's in his late 30s, Joe Pavelski playing well. Father Time just hasn't really seemed to have caught up with these guys just yet. But Ovechkin's 20 goals have been huge for the Caps this season. 3 of those coming in their most recent outing against the Blackhawks in Chicago, where Ovi finally hit the mark of 800 career goals. He is now 2 away from taking over the second spot on the all-time goal-scoring list in NHL history. Gordie Howe had 801, so Alexander Ovechkin will be looking to not only tie that record, but surpass it sometime here over the next few games, or he very well could do it tonight in Washington against the Stars. And then, of course, the only player after that who will have to continue to pursue will be the great one, Wayne Gretzky. But Alexander Ovechkin continues to be just an incredible story, an incredible player. He's already won the Stanley Cup. Not a ton in his career that he has not already accomplished, but of course would be really cool to see a player from this generation surpass the greatest player to ever do it in Wayne Gretzky. Of course, that's not going to happen this season, but very well could happen here in the next few years if Ovi continues to play at a very high level. And the Caps in general, I mean, they've been led by Ovechkin, and they've been led by a few other really nice depth players that we'll talk about in the next segment, but they've had to battle a lot of adversity this season. You look at some of the guys that have been on IR. Tom Wilson and Nicholas Backstrom have yet to play this season, although they are back practicing with the team and kind of getting reacclimated. It doesn't look like that they will play in this game against Dallas, but those have been 2 key players that have not played yet for the Caps this season. Their starting goaltender, who they acquired in the offseason, Darcy Kuemper, is currently on IR. Connor Brown is a player who was a 40-point player last season in Ottawa. They picked him up in a trade. He's currently on IR. Those are some of the notable names. A lot of other players, some defensemen, some depth pieces around the roster, also on injured reserve, and some of them even on long-term injured reserve. So, I mean, this has been one of the most injury-ridden teams this season, and it's really just hurting them on all 3 fronts of the game, in forward depth, defenseman depth, and goalie depth. With Kuemper out, the Caps have had to lean on Charlie Lindgren and Hunter Shepard, who has been the backup, but still has yet to play a game this season and has yet to play a game in his NHL career. So I do imagine that we will see Charlie Lindgren, who has been in net for the last 5 wins for this Washington squad. The next start for him, which I imagine will be tonight, will actually tie a career high for him in games played in a season. The most he's ever played in a season is 14. He's currently played 13 games for the Caps this season. He's only played 42 games in his NHL career up to this point. He's in his late 20s, 28 years old. Still not a ton of NHL experience, but he's been red hot for this Capitals team over this recent stretch. Over the win streak, he is, of course, 5-0 with the 1.81 goals against average and a .938 save percentage. So nothing short of spectacular from Charlie Lindgren. And so you have to imagine the Washington Capitals are going to want to continue to ride that hot hand, especially in a big home game where they're trying to focus on getting Ovechkin over the Gordie Howe milestone of goals scored in a career. He's been playing incredibly well, and some of the games against some pretty good teams. He played well against the Edmonton Oilers, and of course did pretty well on Tuesday against the Chicago Blackhawks. Not necessarily the most high-powered offense, but whenever you can have a goalie win 5 straight, and I think 4 of those 5 wins have been on the road, that's pretty impressive, especially for a guy who hasn't even played 50 career NHL games yet. Playing really, really well and coming up big as the Caps are waiting for Darcy Kuemper to eventually come back and get healthy, because Kuemper was having a decent season before he went down, and so now they're riding Lindgren, and they're going to continue to see how much longer they can continue to rely on him to help get some big wins and keep them alive in the playoff race in the Metro Division. Well, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we will continue to talk about this Washington Capitals team. We'll talk about some of their depth and some of the key players to keep an eye out for that are not named Alexander Ovechkin. More on that right after this. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and World Cup. They've got it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those as well at BetOnline. They are always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting information. So you can head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action happening around the sports world. BetOnline.net is where the game starts. I want to thank you again for making Locked On Stars your first listen of the day. Remember to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube and follow us on your favorite podcasting platform as well. Always free and available no matter where or how you choose to listen. We are continuing to preview tonight's matchup between the Dallas Stars and the Washington Capitals. And we've highlighted Alexander Ovechkin. We've highlighted the goalie situation for this team, but while it may be a big night for the Great Eight, there are certainly other players to be mindful of on this roster. Although the majority of these players, when they're on the ice, if they are on the ice with Ovi, will likely be looking to set him up for a couple of goals in this game. You, of course, have Dylan Strome, who has been playing the center position on that first line with Alexander Ovechkin. He's racked up quite a few assists this season, only 6 goals, but 17 assists, and is tied for second on the team in overall scoring with 23 points. Right beside Evgeny Kuznetsov, who is playing that second-line centerman position, 4 goals and 19 assists for Kuznetsov this season. And then on the right side of that top line for the Washington Capitals, you have Connor Sheary, who has 9 goals, which is second most on the team behind Ovechkin, 9 assists, 18 points on the season. And then, of course, headlining the defensive front for this team, you have John Carlson with 8 goals, which is third best on the team, and 11 assists to go with it. And on top of all that, you have Anthony Mantha, Sonny Milano, who comes over from Anaheim, who I thought the Stars could have made a move to get this offseason, but now Milano finds himself from the worst team in the league in the Ducks to a team that is starting to trend upward in the Washington Capitals. You have TJ Oshie. I mean, this team has some weird players and some guys playing that maybe you wouldn't expect to be playing this season, but a lot of that has to do with the amount of injuries on the roster and how many adjustments that this Capitals team has had to make this season. And despite all of that, despite all of the adversity, the things they can't control, they're still playing at a relatively high level and still very competitive in this Eastern Conference and in their own division. And they, just present challenges for teams every night, when a lot of times for a lot of teams it'd be very easy to kind of roll over and die. We're seeing a lot of teams continue to press forward and find ways to win games despite injuries, and the Capitals are one of the best teams at doing that this season. And so the Stars will have to play incredibly disciplined and be mindful of who is out there on the ice, because even if they aren't the flashiest names or the biggest names in the NHL, this team has still shown that they can go out there and they can score several goals a game, and they can also defend pretty well and set up their goalie Lindgren for success. And you also just have to factor in that this game will be heavily watched, both on TV, I'm sure, but in person as well. I can only imagine that this will be a packed house, a likely sellout crowd, with a lot of Capitals fans hoping to witness history of Ovechkin becoming the NHL's second all-time leading goal scorer. And so that makes you question, will the Washington Capitals become prisoners of the moment? Will they, be looking too much into that storyline and looking to do too much to set up Ovechkin, that they kind of slack off in other areas of the game? I do think that is something to take into consideration. But you also have to ask the question on the other side, will the Dallas Stars feel overwhelmed by the large crowd and by the potential of having history made with them attached to it for the rest of eternity? I'm not as worried about that. I think a lot of these players on this Stars roster have played in some pretty big moments. A lot of these guys have been on some of the biggest stages in the NHL world, playoffs, Stanley Cup finals, you name it. I don't think this will be too big of a moment for the Stars, although it certainly will not be an easy challenge having a packed house full of Capitals fans ready to witness their best player of all time take another step closer to becoming truly the greatest goal scorer that this league has ever seen. So the Stars will have to play incredibly disciplined and keep their composure and stay cool, despite there being a little bit of extracurriculars, I'm sure, in the crowd. And you take a look at this Capitals team by the numbers, and it's pretty interesting. This is a team that is about middle of the pack in just about every major statistical category. They're 17th in the league in goals scored at 94, 15th in the league in goals allowed at 90, so the goal differential only sitting at +4 for this Washington Capitals team. 17th in the league in power play percentage, executing about 22.6 or 23% of the time, and they are 9th in penalty kill percentage. So one of the better kills in the league, executing at about 81% this season. And so they are an incredibly disciplined team as well. I mean, they have a good PK, but they also don't find themselves on the penalty kill that often in comparison to several other teams around the league. They are 27th in the NHL in time shorthanded at 89 and only 17th in penalty minutes at 274. To put that into perspective, the Dallas Stars near the top of the list with 331 total penalty minutes this season. And the Washington Capitals also draw quite a few penalties. They have drawn 100, or they've had 106 power play opportunities this season, which is fifth most in the National Hockey League. So the Dallas Stars are going to have to play disciplined in terms of keeping the slot area clean and keeping the front of their net clean, making sure they're being mindful of their back checks and their forechecks, keeping all of the guys in front of them and taking account for every opposing player on the ice. But they also have to be disciplined in terms of penalties, because the Washington Capitals have a tendency to draw penalties. And while it's not the deadliest power play in the league, you certainly do not want to load a power play that has Alexander Ovechkin on it. That is a recipe for disaster, especially in a game where you have to imagine he is going to get a heavy dose of shots on net this contest. So you don't want to load that Washington power play, but also you got to find a way to draw penalties yourself and get power play opportunities for yourself, because the power play is a little bit cold right now. But if you rack up a ton of opportunities, you can try to find a way to exploit some of the holes in this Washington Capitals defense and try to make life difficult for Charlie Lindgren in net. So special teams are going to play a huge role in this game. The question for the Stars is, can they stay disciplined and keep it at 5-on-5? And can they find a way to draw a few penalties to give themselves some looks on the power play and try to build a lead and try to build some separation in this contest? Well, we're going to take one more quick break, but when we come back, we will close out with our keys to the game, talk about what the Stars need to do in order to leave Washington, D.C. with 2 points. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is brought to you by the NHTSA. You're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks. A few becomes too many, and as the evening comes to an end, people start to head out. And you think of calling for a ride, but no, you live nearby. You can make it. It's okay. It's no big deal. What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up, you lose your license, you lose your job, you total your car, or maybe you kill someone. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. And that's why police officers are out right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. All right, we're closing out today's episode of Locked On Stars with my keys to the game for tonight's matchup between the Stars and the Washington Capitals, the second and final meeting of their two-game season series. And obviously, goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, the game plan for the Stars going in needs to be to find a way to shut down Alexander Ovechkin. And that's not just because he's on the cusp of history and maybe, either getting tied for or becoming the second all-time goal scorer in league history. This would be the game plan regardless. He is their best player. He's their best goal scorer, and the Stars did a pretty good job of this last time. He, of course, did get a few looks on net when these teams met in Dallas. But Jake Oettinger was up for the task and played well, and the defense as a whole played pretty well in that contest. So you got to find a way to duplicate that. And the Stars in general have played some really solid defense for the most part. Of course, a few mishaps here and there on this road trip, but the road trip against Pittsburgh and against New Jersey, the defense has looked really solid, and the goaltending has, of course, been spectacular. I imagine that we will see Jake Oettinger in net tonight. Scott Wedgwood gives Jake the night off on Tuesday, but now Jake should be rested and good to go. I imagine he gets to start tonight, and I would guess that we'd see him Saturday in Carolina, and then I wouldn't necessarily mind seeing Scott Wedgwood get the start on Monday in Columbus, just again to give Jake some time off. And I mean, depending on how the rest of this road trip unfolds, maybe you give Scott one more look on the road, because he's been lights out on the road for the Stars this season, but that's a different conversation for a different day. The biggest key to this game, shut down number 8, and that's a really good place to start for the Stars if they want to leave Washington, D.C. with 2 big points. But also, we talked about it a little bit earlier in the show, you also don't want to be prisoners of the moment. Neither teams should be feeling overwhelmed. I think, if anything, the Capitals could be more at risk for sort of a trap game of packed house, the chance to witness history, the chance to be a part of history. Maybe it's too much for some of the Washington Capitals players, and you just never know. I mean, sometimes players can look too far ahead into that kind of stuff, or look too deep into that kind of stuff and kind of forget the fundamentals of the game, or make really silly and sloppy mistakes. So if you're at least on the Dallas Stars side of things, just stay calm, stay composed, and just treat it like a normal game, because for this Dallas team, that's exactly what this game is. This is just another game for them, business as usual, the middle of a road trip. You want to find a way to string together some wins. You just got a big win on Tuesday against one of the best teams in the league, and now you're going up against a team that has won 5 straight. So it's not an easy outing, but this is just another game for the Dallas Stars. So if anything, you want to come in and crash the party. I mean, the Washington Capitals crashed a party for the Dallas Stars last season. The Caps came in and played on the night that the Stars retired Sergei Zubov's number, and then proceeded to shut the Stars out 5-0. So the Stars hopefully looking to return the favor a little bit and try to send the Capitals and their fans home with a loss. That'd be really great to see, obviously, to not be attached to this moment in history forever, of Ovechkin potentially passing Gordie Howe's milestone, but also to get 2 big points moving into the weekend before you go play a rough game against the Carolina Hurricanes in one of the loudest and craziest buildings in the league. And of course, and we touched on it a little bit earlier throughout the show, but the Stars also need to continue to play well defensively. They've been less leaky over the past few games around the net. They've done a good job of clearing the pucks out, and of course, the goalies have also looked a little bit sharper. Jake Ottinger has played well over the past few games. Again, I'm just speculating that we will see him in net after a great performance from Scott Wedgwood. If the Stars can make his job easy, and if he can find a way to rise to the occasion against Ovechkin and some of these other talented Washington scorers, I think this team is going to be in a great position to come away from this game with a win. And also, I think it goes without saying, potentially, with the amount of injuries on this Washington team, they have played really well, but with as many injuries as they have and with as many roster shortcomings as they have, there's bound to be a few weaknesses, and hopefully the Stars can find what those weaknesses are either before the game or during the game, and they can make adjustments and find ways to exploit those weaknesses. I mean, this has been a good run over the past week or so for Washington, but they will have holes. They will have areas of their game that the Stars, if they make the proper adjustments, they can absolutely exploit and take advantage of. And of course, the big question is, will Charlie Lindgren stay hot for this Washington team, and can the Dallas Stars finally cool him down a little bit? They got to put pressure on him. They got to get shots on net, and they have to make his job very difficult because you just have to imagine the Washington Capitals are going to return the favor and do just that against Jake Ottinger. So I expect a lot of shots on net for both teams, as both teams will be trying to crack the armor in some goalies that have been pretty good so far this season. And the last thing that I'm really curious about, at least on the Stars end, is whether or not they'll dig into some of the depth on their roster. The Stars have Joel Hanley and Riley Tufte on this trip. Neither of them have played in the previous 2 games. I don't necessarily see why they would. It seems like the Stars coaching staff has favored the usual players, and I think Hanley and Tufte are just here for depth in case someone gets injured or in case someone needs a maintenance day. So speculating before, morning skate, recording this on Wednesday, the day before the game, I don't necessarily see a reason why either of those guys would play, but they are there, and I'll be keeping an eye out. I'll be curious to see if either of those guys get moved into the roster, but I bet that they're on the trip, and if they are going to get playing time, it might be closer to the end of the road trip, maybe even on Monday in Columbus, once guys have played 4 games on the road, and there might be a little bit more wear and tear throughout the lineup. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you again for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. Remember to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and follow us on your favorite podcasting platform. Remember, we are free and available no matter where or how you may choose to listen. You can also follow us on social media at Locked On Stars on both Instagram and Twitter, as well as my personal Twitter account at Dane_Lewis. Be sure to tune in tomorrow as we'll be recapping this game and also looking ahead to the weekend for the Stars game on Saturday night against the Carolina Hurricanes. Should be a ton of fun, and hopefully we're talking about another Dallas Stars road win. But I hope you guys enjoy your Thursday and enjoy the game tonight. If you're going to the watch party at Texas Live, have a good time. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun. Enjoy the game, cheer loud, and let's push the Stars here in Texas or wherever you're watching. Push them across the finish line for another big win. But we'll see you guys back here tomorrow.